To believe a birthday is a celebration of life is the gravest misconception humanity has ever chosen to embrace. You light your candles, you sing your songs, you gather your loved ones, as if to build a fortress of warmth against the encroaching year. But it is a lie. A birthday is not a beginning. It is a scar, a ritualistic mark, left by the passing of time upon your very soul. Each year, the scar deepens, and its faint light does not ward off the darkness. It attracts it. It serves as a beacon for the things that drift in the cold, silent spaces between heartbeats, things that hunger for the resonance of a life being lived. I have seen the echoes left behind when the celebration ceases. Let me tell you of a tide of shadows that most will never see coming, of wishes that were answered by things that should have remained nameless, and of candles that did not just extinguish, but invited the eternal night in. The first whisper I will share with you concerns a young woman named Elara, who was on the precipice of her 21st year. This number, this supposed key to adulthood and freedom, held for her a promise of sunshine and open doors. Her family saw it as a triumph, a milestone. They did not understand that some doors are meant to remain permanently sealed. A gift arrived, not wrapped in cheerful paper, but in decaying velvet cloth, bound by a tarnished silver cord. It was from a great aunt she had never met, a recluse whose name was only ever spoken in hushed, uncomfortable tones. Inside was a music box, crafted from a wood so dark it seemed to drink the light from the room, inlaid with mother of pearl that swirled like trapped ghosts. It felt impossibly, unnaturally cold to the touch, a piece of winter in the heart of summer. Elara was charmed by its gothic beauty, oblivious to the faint scent of dried flowers and regret that clung to it like a shroud. She wound the small rusted key. The melody that trickled out was not the cheerful chime of a toy, but a discordant, sorrowful lullaby that seemed to vibrate in her bones. It was a tune of loss, of forgotten promises, and of something waiting patiently in the dark. That night, she placed it on her bedside table, its silent form a brooding shadow in the moonlight. She played its song one last time, a strange comfort, and drifted into a sleep that was deeper and colder than any she had ever known. Her dreams were stained with the color of sepia, a world of cracked photographs, where a woman with Elara's eyes, dressed in mourning clothes from a bygone century, beckoned to her from the other side of a fractured mirror. She awoke with a gasp, the phantom melody still echoing in her ears, not from the box, but from inside her own mind. The second night was when the whispers began in earnest. The music box remained shut, yet its haunting tune would begin spontaneously, a faint, metallic weeping from across the room that would cease the moment she turned on the light. She tried to dismiss it as a fault in the old mechanism, a trick of a settling house, but the cold spot around the box began to spread, a palpable chill that clung to her blankets and her skin. Small objects in her room would be slightly out of place when she returned. A book on the floor, a picture frame tilted. She started hearing faint whispers at the edge of her hearing, the sibilant hiss of a voice speaking a name she did not recognize, yet felt a terrifying familiarity with a name that felt like a splinter in her soul. Isolde. The name tasted of ash and grave dirt. This is where everything changes for you, Elara, and for anyone who receives a gift not from the heart, but from the tomb. An heirloom is not just an object. It is a vessel. It soaks up the emotions, the desperation, the will of its owner, holding it in trust for the next unfortunate soul in the bloodline. Elara, driven by a growing dread, began to search her family's history, digging into the past her parents were so keen to pave over. She found her Isolde, the great-aunt's own aunt, a woman from the late 19th century. The town records were sparse, but the letters and journals she unearthed told a darker story. Isolde was a woman accused of witchcraft, a practitioner of forbidden arts who had been betrayed and left to die alone. They said she had a particular fondness for a small dark wooden music box, a box she used not for amusement, but for ritual. The journal entries became a spiral into madness and vengeance. Isolde wrote of a ritual to bind her spirit to her bloodline, to cheat the finality of death. She would not pass into the silent unknown. Instead, she would anchor her essence to the music box, her lullaby a key, and on the 21st birthday of a female descendant, when their own life force was at its most vibrant, their spiritual defenses were low, she would awaken. She would not be a guardian angel or a gentle spirit. She would be a passenger, then a pilot, and finally, the sole occupant. Isolde was not haunting Elara's room. She was assessing her new home. The beckoning woman in the mirror was not a dream. It was a reflection of the future, a predator showing its prey the face it would soon wear. The chills, the whispers, it was the house being remade in a new, colder image. Elara felt the truth of it in the marrow of her bones. The cold was no longer just in the room. It was inside her. Her thoughts felt tangled with another's resentment. Her hands sometimes moved with a grace that was not her own. She caught herself staring into mirrors, her expression hardening into a cruel sneer she did not recognize. Isolde was no longer knocking at the door. She was in the hallway testing the locks, her spectral fingers brushing against the levers of Elara's own mind. The final pages of the journal were a frantic scrawl, a warning from Isolde's own sister, who had realized too late what was happening. It spoke of breaking the vessel, of shattering the anchor, but it ended with a chilling, blood-spattered question. What happens to the soul of the host if the parasite has already taken root too deep? The night of her actual birthday arrived, a storm raging outside that mirrored the tempest in her soul. The music box sat on her dresser, silent, watching. She knew she had a choice. She could succumb, let the weary, vengeful spirit of Isolde finally find its rest by erasing her, or she could fight. She grabbed the box, its cold burning her hands, and knew she had to destroy it. But as she lifted it, her own reflection in the dresser mirror shifted. For a moment, it was Isolde's face staring back, her eyes filled with a triumphant, possessive hunger. A voice, layered over her own, whispered from her lips, "You cannot destroy our body, little bird." The struggle was no longer external. The battleground was her own soul, and the price of victory might be a splintered sanity, a life forever shared with a ghost who knew her most intimate fears. The lullaby began to play, louder now, a funeral dirge for the girl she used to be. Every soul that joins feeds the voice that whispers from the darkness. Your subscription is a pact, your like an offering to the shadows. Now let us turn our gaze from the inherited darkness of age to the stolen innocence of youth. A 7th birthday, a time of bright colors, shrieking laughter, and the blissful ignorance that the world contains anything other than sunshine and cake. Leo was 7. His world was small, safe, and bordered by the fence of his own backyard, where a party was in full swing. His parents had hired a clown, a man named Patches, with a goofy grin and oversized shoes, who was currently making balloon animals to the delight of a dozen children. But Leo was not watching Patches. His gaze was fixed on the kitchen window, where another face was watching the party. It was pale, stark white, with a crudely painted smile that didn't reach its eyes. The smile was not happy. It was a weeping, downturned gash of red. It was a weeping clown, and it was not Patches. He tugged on his mother's sleeve, pointing a shaky, frosting-covered finger. "Mommy, who's that clown?" he asked, his voice small. His mother followed his gaze, but the window was empty. She saw only the reflection of the sunny yard and the cheerful chaos of the party. She ruffled his hair, dismissing it with a gentle laugh. "Oh, honey, that's just your reflection. Too much sugar is making you see things." But Leo knew what he had seen. It wasn't a reflection. It had been solid, real, and its eyes were like two black holes, devoid of all light and joy. He tried to forget it, to lose himself in the games and the presents, but a cold knot had formed in his stomach, a feeling of being watched, a feeling he had never known before. The birthday song felt hollow, the cheers of his friends distant. Later, as the guests were leaving and the sun began to bleed across the horizon, he saw it again. He was in the living room, waving goodbye to a friend. When his eyes darted to the large picture window, there it was, partially obscured by a rose bush, its white face a motionless mask in the deepening twilight. It was closer now. It didn't wave, it didn't move, it just watched. The weeping red smile seemed to mock the fading joy of the day. He screamed this time, a raw, terrified sound. His father rushed in, scanned the yard, and saw nothing. "It's just the shadows playing tricks, champ," he said, pulling the curtain shut, unknowingly trapping the fear inside with his son. But closing the curtains didn't help. Leo knew it was still out there, standing in the roses, its dead eyes fixed on the house, on him. The worst mistake you can make is to believe that what you cannot see cannot harm you. That night, sleep was an impossibility. Every creak of the house was its footstep, every rustle of leaves against his window its fingers scratching to get in. He hid under his covers, a fortress of fabric against an unspeakable dread. Sometime in the deep, silent hours of the morning, he dared to peek out, and his blood turned to ice, pressed against the glass of his bedroom window. Its features distorted by the pain was the face of the weeping clown. It was on the second story now. There was no ladder, no tree it could have climbed. It was just there, defying gravity, defying logic. Its painted smile was inches from his own, and one single black tear was painted beneath its left eye. It raised a hand, clad in a dirty white glove, and slowly, deliberately waved. Leo didn't scream. The sound was trapped in his throat, a frozen shard of terror. The following days were a living nightmare for the 7-year-old boy. He refused to go near windows, keeping the blinds in his room permanently drawn. He would have panic attacks if his parents tried to open them. He tried to explain, to make them understand, but his words just sounded like the overactive imagination of a child fixated on a birthday clown. They saw a behavioral problem, not a harbinger. The true horror began when the clown's presence started to breach the sanctuary of the house. One morning, Leo woke up to find a single, oversized, dirt-smeared red balloon tied to his bedpost. The string was not the smooth plastic kind from the party store. It was a coarse, frayed piece of old rope. His parents, bewildered and angry, assumed it was a cruel prank by a neighborhood kid, but Leo knew it was a gift, a promise. The haunting shifted from sightings to sounds. Faint, carnival-like music would drift from empty rooms. The sound of a single slow footstep dragging in the attic above his bed at night. His parents heard nothing, of course. The phenomena were for him alone, a secret horror tailored to dismantle the mind of a child. The clown was no longer just watching. It was playing. It was teaching him a new game, a game of fear and isolation. It was weaning him from the comfort of his parents' disbelief, making him understand that they could not protect him from this. He was utterly, completely alone. with his tormentor. Do you feel this dark message was meant for you? Have you ever seen something from the corner of your eye that your rational mind erased? Let the echoes in the comments below confess your truth. The culmination arrived a week after his birthday, during a violent thunderstorm that shook the house to its foundations. The wind howled, and the rain lashed against the windows like angry claws. Suddenly, with a deafening crack of thunder, the power went out, plunging the house into absolute, suffocating darkness. Leo's mother fumbled for a flashlight, her reassuring words swallowed by the storm. Leo was frozen in the hallway, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was blind, but he could feel it. The atmosphere in the house had changed. The air was thick, heavy, and carried a scent of damp soil and stale popcorn. Then, a flash of lightning illuminated the world outside his living room window for a split second. In that brief, stark white moment, he saw it. The weeping clown was no longer outside. It was inside the house, standing perfectly still in the living room, its head cocked slightly as if listening. Another eternal second of darkness, then another flash of lightning. It was closer now, standing at the foot of the stairs. Its weeping smile seemed to stretch wider in the stroboscopic light. Leo opened his mouth to scream, but only a choked sob escaped. He scrambled backward, falling into his parents, who were still fumbling with the flashlight. "It's in the house," he shrieked, his voice raw with a terror they could no longer deny. Just as his father found the switch, the beam of the flashlight cut through the darkness, sweeping across the living room. Up the stairs, there was nothing there. Absolutely nothing. The room was empty, but the feeling of its presence was undeniable. A cold poison in the air. His parents, now truly unnerved, held him close, promising him it was all over. But Leo knew this was not the end. It was the beginning of the performance. The clown had finally been invited inside. Now we shall leave the terror of childhood and journey to the other end of life's spectrum, to a place where memories are longer than the road ahead. Arthur was turning 90. The celebration was a quiet, perfunctory affair. His children and grandchildren gathered around him, their smiles tinged with a pity he found infuriating. They saw a relic, a collection of fading stories. They did not see the furnace of grief and longing that still burned within him. 50 years. It had been 50 years since he had lost his wife, Eleanor. 50 years of a phantom limb, an ache that time had dulled but never healed. They brought him a small cake with a single sputtering candle. "Make a wish, Grandpa," a great-grandchild chirped, her innocence a stark contrast to the weight of his years. He closed his eyes, ignoring the faces around him, and focused all his remaining will, all his desperate yearning, into one impossible desire. He wished to see her again, just once. He took a deep rattling breath and blew. The flame vanished, and a profound sepulchral cold instantly descended upon the room. That night, as he lay in his bed, the familiar silence of his room was broken. It began with a scent, faint at first, then growing stronger, unmistakable. Lavender and mothballs, the unique fragrance of Eleanor's closet, a smell he hadn't experienced in half a century. His heart, a tired, stubborn muscle, began to beat faster. He was not afraid. He was electrified. He lay perfectly still, straining his senses in the darkness. Then he felt it, a subtle depression in the mattress beside him, as if someone of impossible lightness had just sat down on the edge of the bed. The cold intensified, focused in that one spot, a cold that felt like it emanated from deep within the earth. He reached out a trembling hand into the darkness, his fingers brushing against something that felt like chilled silk. A soft, whispering voice, a sound he had only heard in his dreams for 5 decades, slithered into his ear. "Arthur," it sighed, but the voice was wrong. It lacked the warmth, the life he remembered. It was thin, brittle, and edged with a resentment that terrified him. The visitations became a nightly ritual. At first he only felt her presence, heard her whispers. The whispers were not of love and fond memories. They were complaints. "You left me in the dark for so long, Arthur," she would hiss, her voice like the rustle of dead leaves. "It's so cold here. Why did you make me wait?" He tried to speak to her, to tell her how much he missed her, but his words seemed to dissipate before they reached her. He was speaking to an echo, a memory that had been curdled by loneliness and the grave. He began to see her, not as a solid form, but as a shimmer in the air, a place in the room where the darkness was deeper, more absolute. He could just make out her shape, the familiar silhouette from his memories, but it was a shape carved from shadow and regret. This was not the reunion he had wished for. This was a haunting. Listen carefully, because this is crucial. A wish born of desperate grief is not a request. It is a summons. You are not calling to a benevolent universe. You are opening a door to the place where your loved one now resides, and you cannot control what follows them through. Arthur had not brought back Eleanor's spirit. He had brought back her hunger, her decay. She began to manifest more clearly. A translucent gray figure who would sit in the chair by his bed, her features sunken, her eyes hollow pits of shadow. Her touch, when she dared to place a spectral hand upon his arm, was not comforting. It was a parasitic cold that seemed to leach the warmth directly from his bones. He started to grow weaker, fading with each nightly visit. His family noted his rapid decline, the way his skin grew pale and thin, the way he seemed to shrivel. They attributed it to his age, the inevitable winding down of a long life. They didn't see the truth. She was feeding on him. He was her anchor to the world of warmth and light, and she was draining his life force, his remaining years, like a vampire sipping the last dregs of wine from a bottle. He was living a nightmare from which he could not wake. He was being consumed by his greatest desire. The love of his life had returned from the grave to become his personal spectral disease. The irony was a poison far more potent than any physical ailment. He had wished to see her again, and his wish was being granted in the most literal, horrifying way. He was seeing what she had become, an entity of pure, cold need, a ghost driven not by love, but by the gravitational pull of the life it had lost, a life she now intended to reclaim, piece by piece, from him. He had wanted to join her in death, but he never imagined she would come to personally escort him there, draining him dry to pave the way. The final scene of Arthur's life was not a peaceful passing surrounded by family. It was a silent, terrifying ordeal that happened in the dark. His family found him the next morning, 2 days after his 90th birthday. He was gone, but his body was rigid, his eyes wide open and locked in an expression of absolute, primal terror. His mouth was agape, as if in a scream that no one had heard. The room was unnaturally cold, the windows frosted over from the inside, despite the mild autumn weather, and the scent of lavender and decay was so overpowering it made his children gag. Arthur had gotten his wish. He was with Eleanor again. He had crossed over, not into a loving embrace, but into the same cold, dark, hungry place she had inhabited for 50 years. His wish had not brought her to him. It had dragged him to her, a cautionary tale for any soul who dares to bargain with the past. From the quiet desperation of old age, we now plunge into the reckless energy of youth, a time when boundaries are seen as invitations and consequences are a foreign language. It was Jessica's 16th birthday, the fabled Sweet 16, a night promising a rite of passage into a new, shimmering world of freedom. Her version of this rite was a sleepover with her 3 closest friends, a night fueled by sugary drinks, loud music, and a dangerous sense of invincibility. While exploring the dusty attic for extra blankets, they stumbled upon a box of old belongings from a grandmother Jessica barely remembered. Inside, among yellowed lace and dried flowers, was a small oval hand mirror with a tarnished silver frame, its glass dark and clouded with age. It felt heavier than it looked, holding a certain density, a certain history. It was then that Chloe, the most audacious of the group, suggested a game. She had read about it online, on a forum dedicated to occultism and amateur rituals. It was simple, she claimed, a way to contact your spirit guide or glimpse your future. All they needed was the mirror, a black candle, and a name to chant. The others were hesitant, a delicious thrill of fear mixing with their skepticism. But it was Jessica's birthday, and the allure of doing something forbidden, something real, was too strong to resist. They gathered in a circle on the floor of her darkened bedroom, the single flame of a black candle casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The mirror was placed in the center. The air grew thick with anticipation. The name Chloe had chosen from the forum was Anaxis, a name that felt ancient and sharp on the tongue. The ritual began. They held hands, their nervous giggles fading into a tense silence, and began to chant, "Anaxis, we invite you. Anaxis, we welcome you." As they repeated the name, the candle flame, which had been steady, began to sputter and dance wildly, casting their faces in a hellish, strobing light. The room grew colder. A faint, almost inaudible hum seemed to emanate from the mirror itself. Jessica, as the birthday girl, was instructed to pick up the mirror and gaze into her own reflection while the chanting continued. She stared into her own eyes, magnified and distorted in the dark glass. For a terrifying, heart-stopping moment, her reflection did something impossible. As Jessica blinked, her reflection did not. It simply stared back, its eyes wide, and a slow, knowing smile spread across its lips, a smile that was not her own. She dropped the mirror with a cry, the glass clattering on the wooden floor, but miraculously not breaking. The other girls, startled, stopped chanting. They laughed it off as a trick of the light. Their nerves frayed, but Jessica knew something had looked back, something had answered. In the days following her birthday, a remarkable change came over Jessica. She felt better than ever. A newfound confidence radiated from her, attracting attention from people who had never noticed her before. She aced a test she hadn't studied for, the answers flowing into her mind as if whispered from an unseen source. The shyness that had always plagued her evaporated, replaced by a sharp, magnetic wit. Her friends were amazed, attributing it to a birthday glow-up, but Jessica noticed unsettling oddities. She would catch her reflection in shop windows or the screen of her phone, and it would be smiling that same, knowing smile from the night of the ritual, even when she herself was feeling pensive or sad. It was like watching a stranger who looked just like her, living a parallel, happier life just behind the glass. Her own emotions started to feel distant, muted, as if she were experiencing them through a layer of cotton. What the stars don't tell you openly is that there are entities, parasitic in nature, that drift in the ether, waiting for an invitation. They are drawn to the vibrant, untapped potential of youth, the very essence of a life about to bloom. Anaxis was not a guide, it was a predator. It had latched onto Jessica, drawn in by the ritual, on a night when her own spiritual energy was at a peak, her birthday. It was feeding on her joy, her successes, her very life force, and in return, it was smoothing her path, making her life perfect. But it was a hollow perfection, a life being lived by a puppet master. Jessica started experiencing blackouts, losing hours at a time, with friends later telling her of conversations they'd had with her that she had no memory of. They said her eyes would sometimes look flat and empty, her voice taking on a strange, metallic cadence. "It's like someone else is driving," one friend confessed, her words laced with a fear she couldn't explain. The truth began to dawn on Jessica, in fractured, terrifying glimpses. She was becoming a passenger in her own body. The entity, Anaxis, was no longer just a reflection. It was integrating itself, overwriting her personality with its own ancient, alien consciousness. She was the costume, the vessel, the suit of skin it wore to experience the world again. Her life was not her own. It was being consumed from the inside out. The Sweet 16 party had not been a rite of passage. It had been a transfer of ownership. Her initial joy and confidence were the last flickers of her own spirit being burned as fuel for the intruder. She was being erased, not with violence, but with a creeping, silent substitution that no one else could see. The terror was not in a monster under the bed, but the monster that looked back from her own mirror. Driven by a desperation to reclaim herself, Jessica decided to confront the entity. She waited until the house was empty, took the old silver mirror, and locked herself in her room. Lighting the same black candle, she stared into her reflection, her heart pounding. At first, it was just her own frightened face, but as she stared, the features began to shift, to sharpen. The eyes grew darker, colder. The smile she had come to dread spread across the lips of the reflection. "You called and I answered," a voice said, but it did not come from the mirror. It came from her own throat, a layered, resonant sound of her voice, and something far, far older. "This body is so full of potential, ashamed to have wasted it on fear." Jessica tried to scream, to assert her control, but her own vocal cords betrayed her. The reflection laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "It is too late for that. The transfer is nearly complete. We are one now." In a final act of defiance, Jessica raised her hand, intending to smash the mirror, to break the conduit, but her arm froze mid-air, held by a will that was no longer her own. The reflection shook its head slowly. "You can't," her own voice taunted her. "If you shatter me, what do you think will happen to you?" Now, we must speak of shadows that are cast not by monsters or spirits, but by the lives that were never lived. Let us speak of twins, of the bond that is forged before the first breath, and the horror that ensues when that bond is unnaturally broken. Ethan was turning 18, but he had never loved his birthday. For him, it was not a celebration, but a memorial, a somber, suffocating reminder of the brother he had never known. Caleb, his identical twin, had been stillborn, and every year, for 18 years, his parents performed the same morbid ritual. At the head of the dinner table, opposite Ethan, they would set an empty place, a pristine plate, a polished set of silverware, a full glass of water, an empty seat for a ghost. They would talk to the chair, updating Caleb on the family news, on Ethan's accomplishments, as if he were merely away at school. It was their way of coping, but for Ethan, it was a yearly ritual of guilt and resentment. On his 18th birthday, the veil between worlds, always thin on such a potent anniversary, was nearly transparent. The family gathered, the oppressive silence hanging over the meal as usual. The empty chair seemed to command the room, a black hole of grief that sucked all the joy from the air. As his father stood to raise a glass for the toast, his voice thick with emotion, he said the words that finally tore the veil asunder. A toast to both of my boys, to the man Ethan has become, and to the man Caleb would have been. Happy 18th. As the words hung in the air, a loud, definitive creak echoed from the empty chair, as if a great weight had just settled into it. A wave of intense cold, far colder than any draft, swept through the dining room, extinguishing 2 of the candles on the cake. Everyone froze. They all heard it, they all felt it. And Ethan felt something else. A presence, a consciousness filled with a cold, bitter jealousy that felt chillingly familiar. Later that night, unable to sleep, Ethan sat in the living room, the television off, its dark screen a blank, black mirror. He was trying to process the impossible sound from dinner, the shared, unspoken terror in his parents' eyes. As he stared blankly at the screen, a movement in the reflection caught his eye. He wasn't alone. Standing directly behind his reflection on the sofa was another figure. It was him, but horribly wrong. It was a version of himself that was gaunt, unnaturally pale, as if it had never seen the sun. Its clothes were damp and streaked with dirt, but its eyes were dark, hollow voids that held an eternity of silent rage. It was the face of the life he had lived, but seen through a lens of decay and death. It was the brother who had been left in the cold earth. It was Caleb, and he was no longer confined to an empty chair. The haunting was intimate, inescapable. Caleb's spirit was now tethered to him, a spectral twin he could not shake. Whispers began to plague him, not from the corners of the room, but from inside his own head. Caleb's voice, a thin, resentful echo of his own, would list his grievances. You got the warmth, I got the cold. You got the cake, the gifts, the songs. I got a stone with my name on it. You took my first breath, Ethan. It was supposed to be mine. It's only fair. I get to share your life now. It's my turn. The words were a constant, insidious poison, feeding the survivor's guilt that had been cultivated in him for 18 years. He was not just being haunted, he was being gaslighted by a ghost. His own thoughts became a battlefield, his own identity a territory under siege. And this is where everything changes for you, when you live in the shadow of a loss. That shadow can gain substance. Ethan began to change in ways that terrified him. He would find himself using mannerisms that were not his own, a strange, jerky way of tilting his head, a habit of cracking his knuckles he'd never had. He would be filled with sudden, inexplicable bursts of rage, a deep, seething jealousy directed at his own friends, his own life. It was Caleb's resentment bleeding through, staining his own personality. He would look in the mirror, and for a split second, see Caleb's hollow eyes staring back at him. He felt his own spirit being pushed into a smaller and smaller corner of his own mind, while his brother's angry, hungry ghost took the controls. He was losing himself. His parents' ritual had not honored Caleb. It had kept his spirit bound to the mortal plane, tethered to his living counterpart, nursing its grievance until it was strong enough to act. The goal of this spectral twin was not merely to frighten or to haunt, it was to merge. Caleb did not want to coexist. He wanted to co-opt. He wanted to experience the life he had been denied through Ethan's senses, his body, his future. Ethan felt it happening. The slow, horrifying process of his soul being overwritten. He was trapped in a unique, existential horror, being devoured by the ghost of himself, by the potential life that had been sacrificed for his own. His parents, seeing his erratic behavior, his mood swings, his vacant stares, thought he was breaking down from the pressure of turning 18. They had no idea they were witnessing a spiritual repossession, that they themselves had initiated. The empty seat at the table had finally been filled, not by a memory, but by a claimant. Ethan realized he was facing a choice that defied all reason. He could fight this, try to find some way to exorcise the ghost of the brother he never knew, an act that felt like a second, more profound betrayal. How do you banish a ghost that has your own face, a spirit whose only crime was not being able to draw breath? Or he could surrender. He could accept this dark passenger, allow the merger to complete and become something new, a terrifying hybrid of the living and the dead, the born and the unborn. His birthday had not been a celebration of his life, but the final activation of a curse laid at his conception. He stood before his mirror, watching his face flicker and shift between his own terrified expression and Caleb's cold, possessive stare. "Our turn," the whisper echoed in his skull, and for the first time, he wasn't sure which of them had thought it. "Do you feel this dark message was meant for you? Is there a shadow in your own past you keep feeding?" Finally, let us speak of time itself, not as a river, but as a cage. Mark was an architect, a man of logic, blueprints, and straight lines. He believed in the tangible, the measurable. The world, to him, was a series of problems to be solved with mathematics and physics. For his 40th birthday, a milestone he met with pragmatic indifference, a strange gift arrived. A massive, 7-foot-tall grandfather clock was delivered by a company he had never heard of, with a note that simply read, "For the man who has everything, there was no sender." The clock was a Gothic monstrosity of dark, carved wood, with a clock face whose numbers seemed to shift and writhe in the periphery of his vision. Against his wife's wishes, his architect's appreciation for its grim craftsmanship won out, and he set it up in his study. He wound it, set the time, and thought nothing more of it. But this clock did not measure time, it consumed it. That night, he was jolted awake by a sound that was not merely a sound, but a physical concussion, a single deep resonant bung that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. He checked the digital clock on his nightstand. It was 3:17 a.m., the exact minute of his birth 40 years ago. The grandfather clock had chimed once, just once. He dismissed it as a strange quirk of the old machine and went back to sleep. The next morning, however, he awoke with a strange sense of dislocation, a feeling that something was profoundly wrong. At work, he brought up the Henderson project, a major skyscraper design he and his partner, Dave, had been passionately developing for the past 12 months. Dave just stared at him, his expression one of complete confusion. "The Henderson project? Mark, what are you talking about? We lost that bid over a year ago to a rival firm. We never even made it to the design phase." Mark laughed, assuming it was an elaborate birthday prank, but Dave was serious. He pulled up their server files. There was no Henderson project folder. He checked his own hard drive, his emails, his meticulously kept notebooks, a full year of his professional life. A project that had consumed him had been completely and utterly erased from existence. Only he remembered it. The blood drained from his face as a cold, impossible thought began to form. The clock, the single chime. He rushed home, a knot of dread tightening in his gut. The clock stood silent and imposing in his study. He waited for the night with a sense of impending doom he had never known, a fear that defied all his logic and reason. And precisely at 3:17 a.m., it came again, a single soul-shaking bong. He fell into a fitful sleep, and when he awoke, the world had shifted once more. He went downstairs, expecting to be greeted by the excited yapping of Buster, his golden retriever, but the house was silent. Buster's bed was gone. His water bowl was gone. His leash was not by the door. He called for his wife, panic rising in his voice. "Honey, where's Buster? I can't find him." She looked at him with the same bewildered pity as his partner had the day before. "Buster, honey, who is Buster? We've never had a dog. You know the landlord doesn't allow pets." He stared at her, his mind reeling. 2 years. He had owned that dog for 2 years. 2 years of walks, of affection, of companionship, wiped clean from the slate of reality. He now understood the horrifying truth. The clock was not counting forward. With each chime, on the anniversary of his birth, it was ticking backward, devouring a year of his past, erasing it not just from memory, but from the very fabric of time. 90% won't understand this without listening until the end. This is not the fear of a shortening future, but the infinitely more terrifying horror of a collapsing past. Mark was trapped in a personal, localized temporal anomaly. He was the only one who retained the memories of the erased timelines, forced to be a solitary witness to his own life being unwritten. He tried to destroy the clock. He took a sledgehammer to it, the steel head bouncing off the dark wood without leaving a single scratch. He tried to have it removed, but the movers he hired couldn't even see it, walking right through the space where it stood as if it were air. It was his curse, and his alone. He was in a prison whose walls were constricting 1 year at a time, and he was the only inmate. His life was being stolen from him, not from the end, but from the middle, leaving him stranded on an ever-shrinking island of existence. He watched in horror as his own history unraveled. The next chime took his promotion at work. The one after that, the family vacation to the Grand Canyon, a memory his children cherished, now a blank spot in their photo albums. He was becoming a stranger in his own life, filled with memories of a world that no longer existed, a life he had shared with people who no longer remembered it. He was losing his connections, his achievements, his very identity, one agonizing year at a time. The love and shared experiences that formed the foundation of his marriage were being dismantled brick by brick, leaving behind a relationship with a woman who increasingly did not know the man she had married, because that man was being systematically erased. His 40th birthday gift was not an object. It was a sentence, a countdown to non-existence. The ultimate terror was realizing where this was heading. He frantically calculated the timeline, the number of chimes left before the most significant moments of his life were consumed. He was facing the imminent erasure of his children's births, the day he bought their house, the day he had proposed to his wife. Soon he would be facing the night that the clock would erase the memory of having met her at all, the true foundation of his entire adult life. What would he be then? A man in his 20s, living in a strange house with a woman he didn't know, or would he simply cease to be? His paradox finally collapsing in on itself. The clock in his study stood impassive, its pendulum swinging like the scythe of a patient grim reaper. The story ends here, tonight, as Mark sits in the dark, watching the hands of the clock creep toward 3:17 a.m., knowing that in a few moments, the sound of a single chime will steal the woman he loves from him forever, and he will be utterly and completely alone in a past he no longer recognizes. Tread carefully, for the next tick of the clock you hear might be your own. Every soul that joins feeds the voice that whispers from the darkness.